So a couple of things that do directly influence people during this era. We have Charles Darwin, and his evolutionary ideas begin to take root. I am way down here. There we go. So he wrote a book. What was the name of his book?
Edward Mueller.
Okay.
I don't know what's on here. I just want to. I have no idea.
Okay. All right. He does write The Descent of Man, but The Origin of Species is the first book that he writes. And Origin of Species says that every species is gradually changed by its environment. Is that true?
Yes.
On a minor level.
Okay, and yeah, on a minor level, in some places, in some cases, yes. For instance, people who live in different climates are able to adjust to that climate a little more easily and can adapt to that. Remember the first day that I moved down to Atlanta, Georgia, we moved in late July, and I remember stepping out of our moving van that had been air conditioned since southern Indiana. I'd not gotten out, and all of a sudden we pull in, and I open the door, and I thought I was going to die because I inhaled that humid, hot Atlanta, Georgia air, and I thought, how in the world can anybody not melt in this environment? I did not think I was going to survive that summer. But I eventually adapted, figured it out. I realized it's okay to sweat, and people do, and it's fine, and you'll live. So stay hydrated. And so people do adjust to that type of thing. Now, I know that's more on a minor scale, but
How did you feel when you moved back to Indiana?
I was cold. All right, I really was.
I'm still cold. I've been here my whole life. So welcome to the club.
Yeah. So one of the main ideas that comes out of this origin of species is also the concept of survival of the fittest. That would be a key idea I would include in here that's not going to show up on the screen. But survival of the fittest is exactly what it sounds like. That those are the strongest, those that are the best prepared are going to survive. So that can apply to the animal kingdom, that can apply to the plant world, that can apply to humans, that can apply to business. We're going to see how that is applied later on. The Descent of Man begins to apply the evolutionary theory, origin of species, to mankind.
Is descent as before seen? Yes.
Yes.
Descent.
If we're going to continue having R, I'm going to have to connect this directly. Is what? There we go. We'll go that route. Here it is. So the descent of man, that applies the evolutionary theories to mankind. Not just to the animal and plant world. It's going to apply that more to mankind. So also the idea of the survival of the fittest would be included in all of that. And so one of the challenges that we see to Christianity during the end of the Industrial Revolution and during the progressive and the social change era here is that we see people who try to explain life and try to explain Christianity through the ideas of science. Because science was such a fast-moving part of society and people were embracing these new scientific ideas, Christians began to buy into the idea that they had to prove God through science. And they had to prove their beliefs through science. And most of the world began to expect that, so that if you couldn't prove your beliefs scientifically, then they were not going to accept them. Well, of course, we know that there's a faith element to all of that. And if somebody's not going to believe the Bible because you can't prove it 100%, then they're missing out on that whole idea of faith. Remember that the just shall live by faith, as we studied Martin Luther in the book of Romans, that the just are not, the Bible doesn't tell us, the just shall live by scientific evidence, because otherwise, again, it doesn't require faith. That leads many to buy into the idea of the social gospel. All right, so because of improvement of society was such a big part of the way of life, the social gospel was this idea and this concept that we are going to make society better within our churches. So the purpose of the church is to improve society. So when somebody walks into our church, we're not going to hand them a Bible, and we're not going to tell them about the love of God. We're not going to tell them that they're a sinner, that they need Christ. Instead, we're going to say, what physical needs do you have that we can meet?
Wait. So, social gospel was the idea that the church is created to improve society?
Yes. Yes. Some took this to more of an extreme than others, because I think we'd all agree that God does call upon us to care about the poor and the needy. We do need to reach out to them. We do need to love on them, care for them, and help them. But that's not our primary purpose. Our primary purpose is to go into all the world and preach the gospel. And we should do that through the means of reaching out to our community. But they were taking this to the extreme that they would leave out the other part of it, and they would not bring them back to the gospel. It was just, we ought to love everybody, and we ought to feed and clothe and reach out to the homeless and send them on their way. So there was definitely something missing through that. There was also humanism that was a big challenge to Christianity as well. Humanism is the idea of putting man before God, essentially making man his own God. So nobody would ever walk up and say, I'm going to go to the church of me today. I'm going to bow down and worship me. I love me so much. But, yeah. But without verbalizing it, that often happens in our actions. That often happens in the way that we go throughout our daily life. So when you think about the decisions you make, how many of the decisions that you have made today were purely selfish for your own gain in life, or your own gain throughout the day, or your own trying to weasel your way into the in crowd, or make yourself look better in front of your friends, or to give yourself an advantage somewhere? Okay? You know, that's human nature. But when we begin to worship ourselves by putting ourselves ahead of God, that is where we start creeping into humanism. Part of the reason for the increase in humanism was an idea called materialism. So materialism is the pursuit of stuff. We have new inventions, new ideas, new things to experience, and people began to pursue their own dreams and desires rather than pursue God. And so that was a challenge to Christianity. And we see a massive lack of church attendance because of these factors, because a lot of Christians stopped going to church because they couldn't explain God through science. They could not scientifically prove the Bible. The idea of the social gospel was a challenge, and then humanism in pursuit of material things caused many people to leave the church as well. In the arts, one of the things that characterize art here at the end of the industrial age is the idea of realism. You guys recognize that book? You recognize Charles Dickens? I hope. This is one of my favorite stories of all time.
I've never heard of Christmas Carol.
I read that in like 5th grade. I didn't want to see the play. It was the best
Yeah.
thing ever. I love it.
Tiny Tim and
I like the
Bob Cratchit, Scrooge. Okay, that's the story of A Christmas Carol. Okay. Now, Charles Dickens was the author here. For sake of time here, I'm going to just kind of breeze through some of these guys, especially the ones that I know we're not going to see again. But the idea of realism, I do want you to write down something here to get the main gist of what they're trying to accomplish. These realism authors, they were portraying life as it really existed. Okay, the name of this should kind of give away the definition. So when they write, they are writing about the realities of life. And for those of you that have read or those of you that have seen the movie about the Christmas Carol, what is the existence of Bob Cratchit and his family? They're poor. They live in what country? England. Okay. What is the condition of Tiny Tim?
Oh wait, no, he's paralyzed.
Okay, he's going to die soon. He's got something wrong with his leg. He's got a crutch. He's going to die soon. That's the ghost of Christmas future predicts that. They said, unless he gets proper medical treatment. Well, why wouldn't mom and dad give him proper medical treatment? They're poor. It was too expensive. They couldn't afford it. So the sad reality of life, realism, is that this endearing little child in the story is going to die, and there's nothing mom and dad can do about it without the intervention of somebody with a lot of money. Well, who is that? Yeah, it's Ebenezer Scrooge. And no, the uncle wasn't able to do that. Scrooge became an adopted uncle. But Ebenezer Scrooge, what class was he part of?
Middle class.
Probably the middle class, yeah.
Like, it was like,
Yeah, but I wouldn't put him up in the nobility or the upper class because he was still working. Okay, he owned a business. He would be, and that shows the gap between the middle class, between the poor. So realism authors showed life as it really is. And in Charles Dickens' writings, okay? All right.
I'm just organizing my pencil.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be like incorporate Corey.
Yes, but don't be a distraction in doing so. So in Charles Dickens' writings, he was very much a critic on society. Thomas Hardy,
what else did he write? Like Charles Dickens.
Oliver Twist. Yeah, that's another good one.
There was another one though.
Somebody can Google it real quick. I don't have
Wait.
I don't have one on the top of my head. Okay? No.
I was just naming off stuff.
Thank you. Now, we'll come back to that if somebody finds one.
Christmas Carol, Great Expectations, Hard Time, David Copperfield, etc., etc.
Okay.
Our mutual friends.
Yeah. Thomas Hardy is another author. He writes about hopeless struggle. That just says man is just never going to get out of that hopeless struggle, that there's no real point in life. This is one I do want you to pay close attention to here. Thomas Hardy, you can probably shove off to the side for now. But Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, he was a realism author, and he often used humor to help offset the life struggles that people went through. Justin?
Why is his name Mark Twain and
It's his
Samuel?
pen name.
What was the second part of your question?
And Samuel Clemens.
Oh, just because this is his birth name and this was his writing name.
Like Bruno Mars?
It's like a fake name that they go up.
Are you serious?
Isn't Miley Cyrus' name actually Angel or something?
It's like, I know his last name.
Yeah, her name is Angel.
For real?
Who is her?
Michelle.
Okay, wait.
Okay, let's refocus on stuff that may be a little bit more relevant to realism.
That is, I was helping.
You were helping with the pen name idea. I get it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead. Okay.
Okay. Now,
What? Russia?
I'm gonna explain him in just a minute. Okay. Now, for most of these authors, I told you I want you to know the fact that they explain life in reality the way it actually exists. Okay. I don't know that you're going to need to know everything about each individual author, but you should have them as evidence that realism was part of this era. Tolstoy here, he wrote a very realistic view of Russia during the Napoleonic Wars. Okay, so we have to understand what Russia was going through during Napoleon's invasion. In order for us to really understand that, it's best to get it from a Russian. And so he writes this, and it's some of the best writing. Okay, you have an insight into the way Russia was and how much of a struggle life was for the Russian people during that time. So he writes War and Peace. It's one of the longest novels ever. Yeah,
How long is it?
it's really long. I'll confess I have not read the entire thing. I've read sections of it. Okay, let's move on here to Impressionism. What do you see here?
I see a sky, like a little boat, and a green ocean, so I'm like,
Okay. Okay. Why did they not? Why is it so unclear?
sorry.
It's supposed to be. It's the style.
It's the vision, you know?
Okay.
It's like.
It's like those blobs, you have to determine what you see, like for
Not quite that much. No.
It's supposed to represent something. Like it obviously
Yeah.
represents something, but it's not
Yep.
like realistic.
Right.
Oh,
So
I think it's a bunch of warships going to battle.
Impressionism in the arts was about creating an impression through using color and light as the main emphasis. So it was not something where they would have clearly defined lines. It was not a realism emphasis in the art. Otherwise, it would be much more clarity there. So they used bright colors, which you can see those colors evidenced here in this particular painting. Renoir and Monet are the two most famous Impressionist painters. This right here.
It's a boat on a little lake.
Yep.
with trees in it and stuff.
No,
And
it's
then the
not,
sun's
like
going
5
down.
boats
Yes.
going to war.
So
There's literally one boat. Where's the boat?
here's the boat. It gives the impression of the thought. You let your mind kind of fill in the missing pieces.
And like the waves.
It's easier
Yeah. Yeah. So here's the boat here. Here's the waves. You got the tree lines up here.
It's way easier to see out here.
Yeah. Pull it up on your screen. You can see it better. You guys seen this statue before or seen pictures of it?
And that at the museum too.
There you go. Little pop culture coming into history today. Auguste Rodin, he was an Impressionist sculptor. Now, I'm not going to ask you to remember that this was the guy that did The Thinker, but I may ask you which of these would be part of Impressionism, and I may use that as an example there. Okay, Claude Debussy. Debussy, thank you. Clair de Lune is one of the most famous of his compositions. He was one of the leading Impressionist musicians of this time as well. And again, I wish we had more time to jump into more of this, but
Wait, Claude did what now?
he led impressionistic music.
Did he write the piano piece Debussy? Or is that just a bad thing? Because I know there's one, because Maria plays one called Debussy,
Is that the title of it?
I think.
They be busy.
Because she's talking about, she's between Chopin and Debussy for her piano.
Okay, I'm going to pull it up here. You see if...
Okay, so I'm confused about how you can have impressionistic music. Like impressionistic art makes sense to me, but music does not.
Well, part of it was that it was... it was in the same era. All right, so...
So it's just like the popular music.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about composition to be able to tell you exactly what went into all of it. So this is one of his most famous compositions. He has a number of other ones.
It's so pretty. I wanna follow it.
Clair de Lune. Yep. Yeah. Isn't that so peaceful? Calming? Yeah. Love that. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Post-Impressionism. Okay. Paul Cézanne does this piece here. It's Cubism. You can kind of see, and I think the picture on your screen is probably a little bit better. But, yeah, Minecraft. Thank you. Yeah, that would, sure.
It's a dirt block.
There you go. Vincent van Gogh.
Yes.
Yeah. Expressionism.
Did you hear someone? His voice never does that. That was the weirdest thing. That was like a one-time thing.
Okay.